Have you ever walked into a room and felt a shift in the air, not because of words, not because of noise, but simply because someone was there? Their silence speaks louder than the loudest voice. They don't argue, they don't beg, they don't even explain. They just remove their presence, and suddenly everything around them begins to rearrange itself. That's not coincidence. That's not charisma. That's self-mastery. And the truth is, you carry that same power within you, buried under years of people-pleasing, over-explaining, and trying to be who everyone else needed you to be. But the moment you stop reacting out of habit, the moment you choose stillness over the impulse, everything around you begins to expose itself. Because people are not used to your silence. They're used to your reactions. They've relied on your buttons, those familiar emotional triggers, to manipulate, to comfort themselves, to keep you predictable. But when you stop playing the game collapses. There's a strange freedom in choosing not to respond, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. Because the second you step back, you begin to see the people who only needed you for the energy you gave them, the ones who feed off your anxiety, who provoke you just to feel something. And that's when the truth hits. Most of your emotional exhaustion wasn't from doing too much, but from giving your power to the wrong people. Carl Jung said that what irritates us about others reveals something hidden within ourselves. That sting you feel when someone crosses a line? It's a signal. It's not just about them. It's showing you the parts of yourself you've neglected, the boundaries you never set, the silence you've never allowed yourself to sit in. Because deep down, you've been trained, since childhood, to equate worth with availability, to be the one who's always there, to say yes when you meant no, to smile when you were breaking inside. They called it kindness. But what if it was self-erasure? When you are constantly available, people stop seeing you as a person. You become a lifeline, a therapist, a backup plan. And the saddest part? They only reach for you when their world is falling apart, not because they value your presence, but because they need the emotional rescue you've always offered. And once they're stable, you fade into the background again. Does that pattern feel familiar? Now pause. Think about who comes to mind when you hear this. That one person who only calls when they need something. That relationship where your silence feels like a threat, where your boundary feels like betrayal. That's not love. That's dependency wrapped in guilt. You wear a mask to keep the peace. You pretend. You perform. You respond instantly, even when your soul is empty. You explain yourself like your existence needs to be justified, but slowly, without realizing it, you start disappearing from your own life. You show up everywhere but your own inner world. You become everyone's solution, except your own. And maybe, just maybe, your healing doesn't start with another act of kindness, but with a deliberate act of self-protection. What if, instead of replying right away, you just sat in the discomfort? And what if you let the guilt rise, let the anxiety swirl, but didn't move, didn't answer, didn't fix? What would you find there? The ones who demand your constant availability don't really want you. They want the version of you that makes their life easier, the emotional labor, the validation, the distraction from their own chaos. And when that version begins to shift, when you finally say no, when your silence replaces your old responses, they won't thank you. They'll push harder. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because for the first time you're doing something real. And real change doesn't come with applause. It comes with resistance. But what follows is freedom. They'll call you cold, distant, changed, and they won't say it with love. Are you prepared to be misunderstood, maybe even rejected, just to finally reclaim your own life? That's the cost. Not everyone will applaud your clarity. But that discomfort you'll feel in their silence, in their judgment, in their absence, that is the sound of your soul returning home. There is a truth we rarely speak aloud, because it exposes just how much power we've handed away. Your energy, the very force that animates your thoughts, your emotions, your choices, is not unlimited. Every impulsive reaction chips away at it. Every triggered response, every needless argument, every time you explain yourself to someone who has no intention of understanding you, you are bleeding energy. And the most dangerous part is, you've grown so used to the drain, you barely notice it anymore. You give your power away every time you defend yourself against a baseless insult, every time you try to correct someone's opinion of you, every time you engage in a battle of egos, trying to win approval, validation, or clarity from someone who thrives on your confusion. It's not just about what you're doing, it's about what it's costing you. Jung said, What you resist persists. And the more you push against the things that trigger you, the deeper you fall into their trap. You become tangled in what doesn't serve you, stuck in a loop where proving your point becomes more important than protecting your peace. But it doesn't have to stay that way. You can begin right now to make different choices. You don't have to be available to every message, every need, every opinion. You don't have to explain yourself to people who've already made up their minds. You don't need to carry everyone's expectations like a burden on your back. Because the more you begin to guard your energy, the more you'll realize how much of your life has been spent making others comfortable while abandoning yourself. Wholeness, Jung believed, is not about perfection. It's about integration. That means embracing every part of yourself, including your right to say no, your right to protect your time, your right to not respond, your right to disappear from the drama without leaving any explanation behind. Silence is not passivity. It is power. Withdrawal is not weakness. It is wisdom. Choosing not to react doesn't mean you're defeated. It means you've decided your energy is too sacred to waste on battles that lead nowhere. And that shift changes everything. Those who live in a constant state of emotional fatigue are not broken. They are misaligned. It's not their body that's worn out. It's their energy that's been scattered. Emotional exhaustion is almost never about having too much to do. It's about placing your energy into relationships, conversations, thoughts, and patterns that drain you dry. Just pause for a second and think back. How many nights have you lost to overthinking? How many hours have you spent replaying a moment that didn't go your way, wishing you had said something different, wondering why they treated you the way they did, trying to make sense of what can't be made sense of? That isn't healing. That's energy leakage. Quiet, invisible, and destructive. Every time you revisit a moment that wounded you, every time you try to rewrite it in your mind, you're feeding a ghost. You're keeping something alive that should have been let go. You're anchoring yourself to pain, and pain, when it becomes your habit, becomes your identity. But energy, when conserved, when held close, when not wasted on fruitless pursuits, builds presence, real presence, that unshakable inner stillness that people feel without knowing why. That's what creates the kind of power that can walk into a room and change its temperature without a single word spoken. But when you leak that energy through guilt, through chasing validation, through trying to fix what was never yours to fix, you disappear from your own life. You become a shadow of who you could be, reactive instead of rooted, fragile instead of focused. And the world rarely spares those who pour themselves into others without ever pouring back into their own soul. So here's something you can do that might just shift the way you move through life. Carry an edge energy journal. 1 week, every time you feel tired mentally, emotionally, spiritually, pause. Ask yourself what just happened. Who drained you? What thought consumed you? What reaction pulled you out of alignment? Name it. Write it. Track it. Because awareness is the beginning of reclaiming everything. What if the exhaustion you feel isn't because you're doing too much, but because you're doing too much for the wrong people? What if the fatigue isn't physical? It's emotional debt. A constant leakage of your life force into conversations, relationships, and thoughts that only pull from you, never pour back. And when you finally sit with it, when you begin to trace the moments that leave you drained, patterns start to emerge. It's not random, it's not harmless, it's a system, quiet, consistent, and deeply embedded. When you journal your energy, the who, the what, the when, you start to see the truth. Maybe it's a name that keeps showing up, a familiar tone in a text, a repeated memory that tightens your chest every time you revisit it. These aren't just petty annoyances. These are wounds disguised as daily life. They are the places where your boundaries have silently eroded, and those 5 names or situations that take more than they give. That's where your healing starts. Carl Jung understood something most people miss. When you stop giving your energy away unconsciously, you begin to disrupt the expectations others have built around you. You start breaking the roles they assigned you. And that doesn't sit well with them, because now you're not playing the part. You're not nodding, not explaining, not smoothing things over. Now you're disrupting the dance. But this dance was never innocent. It was built on unconscious manipulation, the kind that hides in politeness, in assumed roles, in that unspoken rule that you should always be available, always be kind, always be understanding, that you should care, even when it's killing you inside. That's not compassion. That's conditioning. And here's the truth. Very few will say out loud, you are being manipulated in ways you haven't even begun to see. your kindness, your empathy, your deep desire to be good, they are being used against you. You think you're choosing how to respond, but most of your reactions have been programmed. You were trained, long before you were conscious, to serve peace over self, harmony over honesty. And people who've studied your responses, who've watched how easily guilt moves you, know exactly which button to push. They don't need to yell. They don't need to force you. They just need to tap into the story you're already telling yourself, that you must always be helpful, agreeable, loving, that if you stop, you'll be abandoned. But Jung warned us, when others project onto you, they're not seeing you. They're seeing what they can't face within themselves. And if you're always emotionally open, you become the canvas. You become the mirror. They paint their fears onto you, their needs, their narratives, and you carry it, mistaking it for love. Think about that person who only shows up when they're in need. The one who loves you when you're useful. The one who disappears the moment you stop fixing their chaos. They're not in relationship with you. They're in relationship with the role you agreed to play. And you stayed in that role not because it felt good, but because stepping out of it felt terrifying. Because somewhere deep down you're afraid. Afraid that saying no means rejection. That silence means you'll be forgotten. That putting yourself first means you're selfish. But none of that is true. The most dangerous manipulation doesn't come through conflict. It comes through guilt, through obligation, through that quiet voice that says, you owe them, even when they've taken far more than they've ever given. Jung saw it clearly. The manipulator doesn't need control if they can get consistency. They just need you to keep reacting the same way. Predictable, emotionally available, always there. But the second you break the pattern, the game shatters, the illusion collapses. And that's where the real transformation begins. So try this. Choose one person, the one who drains you the most, the one who always seems to leave you a little smaller than they found you. For 5 days, answer everything they say with only 2 phrases. I understand, or I'll think about it. No more. No emotional labor, no justification, no bending yourself to fit their expectations. And then, watch. Watch how they respond. Watch how they shift. Notice the discomfort, the confusion, the frustration, not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped playing your part. And in that moment, you will see the truth. How much of their control over you was never force. It was compliance. Yours. When you pull your energy back, when you stop reacting, their projection has nowhere to land. The mask slips. The illusion dissolves. And they're left staring at someone they don't recognize anymore. Not because you've become someone else, but because you finally stop pretending. Your silence will unsettle them. Your unavailability will feel like betrayal, but don't flinch. Because what you're reclaiming isn't just energy. It's your soul. They'll say you've changed. They'll accuse you of being distant, aloof, cold. But what they're really reacting to is their own discomfort. Your silence is a mirror, and it forces them to confront the noise they've buried beneath performance, distraction, and control. The moment you stop dancing to the rhythm of their expectations, they're left alone with the echo of their own emptiness. And they don't like what they hear. When you finally choose to protect your energy, it's not just a shift in behavior, it's a shift in identity. And not everyone is ready to meet the version of you that no longer seeks permission to exist. That's when the accusations come. You've changed. Of course you have. You've stopped leaking yourself to everyone who demands a piece of you. And for the first time, you're becoming whole. Something powerful happens when you retreat. Not out of fear, but out of truth. In that retreat, a new kind of force is born. The kind that doesn't yell to be heard. The kind that doesn't need to convince or explain. It's called conscious silence. And it terrifies those who once controlled you through chaos. We live in a world obsessed with volume. Everyone wants to speak. Everyone wants to reply. Everyone wants to win the argument, even if they lose their peace in the process. But the rarest kind of strength today is not expression. It's restraint. The ability to say nothing and still say everything. Carl Jung understood this kind of silence. To him, it wasn't emptiness. It was sacred space. Silence was where the deepest work began. Because the moment you stop reacting, you start seeing. Not just what others are doing, but why you used to tolerate it. The emotional loops, the manipulative patterns, the self-sabotage hiding behind kindness. Silence brings clarity, and clarity is a threat to anyone who depended on your confusion. When you stop speaking, you stop playing. When you go quiet, you change the rules. And people panic, not because they miss your voice, but because they miss their control over it. You've probably noticed it. That discomfort others feel when you don't respond, when you stop explaining, when you simply walk away. It's not love they're mourning, it's the loss of access. Because your silence strips them of the script, and for the first time they're forced to confront that they never really knew you, only the version of you that made them feel safe. Individuation, Jung said. The process of becoming who you truly are requires separation. It requires space. Because only in silence can you hear the voice beneath the noise, and only in that stillness can you begin to make choices rooted in clarity, not compulsion. But don't mistake this for an easy path. Silence is not glamorous. It will cost you relationships that were only sustained by your willingness to abandon yourself. It will leave some people confused, maybe angry, not because you hurt them, but because you stopped letting them control the narrative. They'll say you're arrogant, unfeeling, cold, but all that really means is you're no longer playing a role in their illusion. So here's something to try. The next time you're in a tense conversation, don't defend, don't explain, don't justify. Just say, I understand your point of view, and then say nothing more. Let the silence do what no argument ever could. Observe. Watch what rises inside you, and watch what the other person does when they no longer have your emotional reactions to lean on. You'll learn more in that silence than in hours of back and forth dialogue, because silence is not a gap, it's not absence. It's a container, a boundary, a declaration that not everyone gets access to your truth. As you evolve, you become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of reverence for your own energy. Because eventually you understand. Every word is an investment. Every response is a transaction, and not every person or situation is worth the cost. Silence reveals what words could never say. It forces the world to face itself. And yes, it will make some people uncomfortable. But that discomfort is a teacher. It shows you who is really listening and who is just taking. The most powerful silence isn't the one that disturbs others. It's the one that rebuilds you. It's the stillness that whispers you don't need to perform anymore. You don't need to explain. You don't need to be liked. You just need to be aligned. And now, the final revelation, the one that changes not just how you speak, but how you live, emotional discipline. Because understanding all of this means nothing if your habits stay the same. You can know every insight, quote every truth, and still sabotage yourself by saying yes when your soul's screaming no. By replying to messages that drain you. By holding on to conversations, roles, and relationships that should have ended long ago. Awareness without discipline is just another disguise. A comforting lie you tell yourself to avoid the discomfort of change. But real transformation begins the moment you decide, truly decide, that your energy is sacred, and that means choosing every day to be unavailable to chaos. This doesn't mean shutting down. It means choosing wisely. It means you no longer allow every voice to enter your space. You no longer answer every knock at the door. You no longer explain yourself to those who aren't even listening. Conscious unavailability is not arrogance. It is sovereignty. It is the quiet revolution of reclaiming your time, your mind, your life. It is the bold act of saying, I am no longer emotionally open to people who mistake my empathy for access. Because now you know the truth. You were never too much. You were just too available. And that ends now. There comes a moment when you finally stop running toward everyone else's chaos and begin walking back to yourself. A moment when you realize that not every call deserves an answer. Not every conflict deserves a reaction. And not every presence deserves access to yours. That moment is the beginning of taking back your life, your energy, your time, your peace. And it never begins with grand gestures. It begins with the smallest, quietest, most rebellious acts. You pause before you reply. You step away before the argument starts. You silence your phone, not out of avoidance, but out of reverence. You start saying, not today. You start saying, I'm not interested. You start saying, I won't be involved. And for the first time, you mean it. Carl Jung understood something most people still resist. That growth, true inner growth, demands solitude. Not the kind that drowns you in loneliness, but the kind that brings you home. The kind of solitude where the world's voices fade and your own becomes clear again. That sacred retreat, that inner pause, is where individuation begins, where healing becomes possible. And here's what most people won't tell you. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify your stillness. You don't need to offer disclaimers or soften your withdrawal to make others feel better. You owe no one a performance of your healing. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you remove yourself from their emotional script, where you were always the dependable one, the responder, the giver, the fixer. So try it. Choose one day this week, a full 24 hours of total unavailability. Don't check your messages. Don't respond unless it's urgent. Don't apologize for the silence. Just be still. Watch how it stirs things in others and in you. See who begins to distance themselves when you become reserved. Watch who becomes unsettled when you stop reacting. Take note of who accuses you of changing when you finally begin protecting your energy. These aren't signs that you're doing something wrong. They are proof you've begun to break the invisible contracts that once kept you small. It will feel uncomfortable at first. You'll feel guilt rising in your chest. You'll wonder if you're being selfish. You'll question whether you're becoming cold or even cruel, but none of that is true. What you're feeling is not selfishness. It's self-resurrection. You are finally meeting yourself, without filters, without noise, without permission. This isn't easy. You've been trained your whole life to minimize your needs, to bend for others, to sacrifice your own stillness just to make someone else feel secure. You were taught that love meant overextending, that kindness meant compliance, that worth was measured in how useful you were. So of course, now that you're choosing yourself, it feels foreign, and maybe even wrong. But that discomfort? That's the sound of old programming unraveling. That's the weight of other people's expectations being lifted off your shoulders. It's the heaviness of 1,000 unspoken obligations finally crumbling. You're not losing love, you're shedding conditions. You're not being distant, you're reclaiming space. You're not being cold, you're finally warming up to your own presence. And yes, it will unsettle people, especially those who only knew you as someone easy to reach, easy to manipulate, easy to drain. Your silence becomes the breaking of a spell. Your absence becomes a mirror. And the reflection they see is their own reliance on your constant emotional labor. It hurts, not just them, but you too. Because when the illusion shatters, there's always pain, a rupture, a deep ache that settles in your bones like something sacred just left your body. And in a way, something did. The version of you who kept betraying themselves just to be loved, that version is dying. And then the silence comes, not the gentle kind. At first it roars, it rattles through your chest, it keeps you awake at night asking, did I go too far? Did I hurt someone? Did I just push away the only people who cared about me? That silence will scream, but if you stay with it long enough, if you breathe through it, it begins to soften. The noise inside you fades, the guilt quiets, the doubts dissolve. And then, in that clearing, something new begins to grow. Solitude. Real, rooted, living solitude. Not born of abandonment, but of wholeness. A solitude that isn't lonely. A solitude that feels like finally being seen by yourself. That's the turning point. When you no longer betray your own peace to prove you're lovable. When you no longer chase connection that costs you your soul. When your yes means yes, and your no becomes sacred. That's not distance. That's self-respect. That's not silence. That's rebirth. And you're not disappearing. You're returning to the one place you always belonged. And in the quiet you once feared, something extraordinary begins to rise. Where confusion once tangled your thoughts, there is clarity, sharp and still. Where anxiety used to churn, there's a grounded calm that feels almost foreign in its peace. And where need once echoed through your every action, now lives a steady, undeniable power. The power of wholeness, of finally coming home to yourself. Carl Jung called this individuation, not the act of becoming someone new, but the shedding of who you were never meant to be. The unraveling of the masks, the stepping away from the collective noise so you can hear your own voice again. That is what you're truly doing when you become unavailable. You're not escaping the world. You're no longer running. You're returning, deliberately, silently, powerfully to your own center. You stop being shaped by the external and begin shaping the internal. You stop reacting. You start creating. And you no longer dance to the rhythm of someone else's story. You become the author of your own. And those who were only drawn to your performance, who needed you to be predictable, agreeable, easy, they begin to fall away. Because without your compliance, they don't know how to relate to your truth. Let them go. That confusion they feel isn't your burden to carry. That discomfort isn't yours to fix. Your absence from their story is your presence in your own. And yes, it will cost you. You will lose people. You will outgrow places. You'll walk away from what once felt familiar. But with every step you take away from what's false, you move closer to what's real, yourself. This is where respect is born. Not from being available, but from being aligned. Not from being agreeable, but from being authentic. When you stop saying yes to everything, you become rare. And what is rare becomes unforgettable. You no longer accept emotional crumbs. You no longer tolerate shallow connections dressed up as affection. You only welcome what reflects the depth of your soul. This isn't just healing. It's a revolution. And it begins in the most quiet, personal of ways. With one choice, to choose yourself. To stand still when the world pulls at you. To walk alone, not because you're lost, but because you're no longer willing to follow a path that betrays your truth. It's not easy. You'll be misunderstood. Some will label you selfish, cold, arrogant. They will accuse you of changing when you start honoring your own energy. And they're right. You're changing. But not for them. For you. Because over-availability was never love. Emotional reactivity was never strength. And the silence they fear in you, that silence is your wisdom. You're beginning to see that the people who cannot handle your distance were only ever comfortable with your self-abandonment. And now that you're present for yourself, they're faced with a version of you they never expected. The real one. So yes, it will be lonely at times, but it will also be liberating, because you no longer need to trade your peace for connection. You no longer need to abandon your truth to keep the room warm. You're learning to be whole without needing to be needed. This is the beginning of a life built from integrity. A life that honors your time, your energy, your soul. A life that doesn't demand explanation for every boundary, justification for every silence, or apology for every truth. So I'll ask you this one thing. Are you willing to pay the price of becoming who you really are? Can you let go of being understood in exchange for being free? Can you trade their comfort for your clarity? Because if something deep inside you is arising right now, if these words stirred something ancient and buried, if you recognize yourself in this silence, then your journey has already begun. And now, it's your turn to speak. With your actions, your presence, your choices. If you're ready, if you feel it too, just say it. I choose my peace. Say it, not for me, not for anyone else, but for the person you've always been beneath the noise. Say it and let the world adjust to your silence.